Godspeed to the families of the 13 who were killed at the Kabul airport last Thursday. In reading obituaries for all 13, I was struck by many things, not the least of which was their youth and their normality. When you read the details of each of their lives, they were so typically American in the best of ways, although I guess atypical insofar as the burden of service is borne by so few these days. Axios today has an assessment as to the politics of the fallout from the tragedy in Afghanistan last week. They report that vulnerable House and Senate Democrats are now distancing themselves from President Biden on Afghanistan, and Exhibit A for those Ds placing some distance between themselves and the White House on this issue is a Democrat from the Lehigh Valley of Pennsylvania, and one who I knew in a prior life because we tried a case against one another, Congresswoman Susan Wild, who said in a statement, "It appears that the evacuation process has been egregiously mishandled." Apparently, in an interview with Axios, she said that she doesn't place all of the blame on Biden. She said that there'll be a lot more to uncover through future congressional oversight hearings. A question that I'm asking on radio today: what will be the impact of Afghanistan on the 2022 midterm elections? Will it have a significant impact? Many say no, it probably won't have a significant impact as things stand today, because after all, take a look at Ronald Reagan. And the example that is given of Reagan is of how in 1983, so at the end of Ronald Reagan's first term, 241 Marines were killed by Hezbollah in Beirut. And what was the aftermath relative to that tragedy in political terms? The aftermath was that Reagan withdrew all forces from Beirut in a period of weeks, and then went on to a pretty stunning landslide re-election in 1984 in which he captured 49 states. I don't think in my life I'll see another margin like that, a true landslide election. I had Ron Brownstein from The Atlantic on my CNN program on Saturday morning talking about the politics of what's playing itself out in Afghanistan right now. He said that he thought, and watch the interview, it's available through social media, that there'd be some short-term damage to the Biden administration, but that this by itself was unlikely to have lasting impact. I think his word choice was that what remains to be seen is whether it's part of a broader narrative. This in and of itself won't have catastrophic political consequences for the Biden administration. I went looking this weekend for data, information about the political implication of military fail or mishap. And I found Professor Barbara Perry, who is the Presidential Studies Director at UVA's Miller Center, who wrote about a number of historic events and what had been the election aftermath of a military catastrophe. For example, she said this about Lincoln: Abraham Lincoln's election prompted the South to secede from the Union, and federal forces lost the Civil War's first battle with Confederates at Manassas. As the bloody war between the states raged into 1864, the president faced a potential re-election defeat, but he overcame naysayers, saved the Union, and earned a place among the greatest of American presidents. So Lincoln had military fail early on in the Civil War, nevertheless won re-election. JFK never got to stand for re-election because of the events in Dallas, but in 1961, very early in his administration, had the Bay of Pigs fiasco. Fidel Castro thwarted 1,400 CIA-trained Cuban freedom fighters who had invaded their homeland with CIA support, but were unsuccessful at the hands of Castro. What would have been the impact on Kennedy's re-election, we'll never know, but this much we do know, that despite this fail 90 miles from the coast of Florida, his approval rating soared to 83%. You could look at W, right? The events of September 11, 2001, after a very close election decided by the Supreme Court of the United States, Bush v. Gore. Then come the events of September 11, when we learned of the PDB from 1 month prior to the events of September 11. That was the PDB that I think was captioned, "Bin Laden determined to strike in the United States." W nevertheless goes on to a re-election victory in 2004. And I would argue, and the data supports, that in a post-presidency has really seen a heightening of his approval. The last numbers that I saw were 60% or thereabouts, and it was on his watch that we went into both Iraq and Afghanistan. I mentioned Reagan. I should have mentioned Carter because, of course, the reverse happened with Jimmy Carter. There was a lot of there were a lot of negative signs for Jimmy Carter, not the least of which was the situation with the Iranian hostages. Anybody remember the term malaise or the misery index? I mean, Carter had a lot relative to the economy that he was trying to deal with, but the fact that there were 52 hostages taken in Tehran and that Walter Cronkite, the CBS anchor, the legendary CBS anchor that many of us think of having had such a pivotal role with the turning of American sentiment against Vietnam, but he had a similarly outsized influence with the Iranian hostage situation insofar as he would end every broadcast with a tally of how many days those 52 Americans had been held in Tehran. So was the Iranian hostage situation and the attempt at rescue that failed a factor in Carter's re-election loss? For sure. Yes, it was. So I guess what I would say is that history is all over the place, and it's complicated. It doesn't just come down to one incident, but history is all over the place in terms of assessing the political significance of military mishaps. And you could go back to Lincoln and you could argue it different ways. I agree with Ron Brownstein when he said to me on CNN this weekend that with regard to Biden, it depends if it's part of a broader narrative. And not for political reasons, not for partisan reasons, but just for American reasons. I pray that it's not part of a broader narrative. The survey question at Smerconish.com today: will the withdrawal from Afghanistan be a major issue for 2022 midterm voters? I say, you're asking me as of today? No. Is my vote leaving open the door that if it becomes part of a bigger picture, then yes, it might be. But for now, for today, my answer is no. Vote at Smerconish.com. Give me your answer to today's survey question. Make sure you're subscribing to my YouTube channel. I'll read all your comments later. I hope that you're posting them as you're watching these videos. Ring the bell, and thank you so much for watching.